Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in. We want to get straight to our top story. I'm joined today by Michael Starr Hopkins. Thanks so much for being in the chair.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's get to it. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi equivocated, in my opinion, that's how I would describe it, when asked about Joe Biden continuing to run for re-election. Let's listen to her interview this morning on MSNBC.
Does he have your support to be the head of the Democratic ticket?
As long as the president it's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. I think overwhelming support of the caucus. It's not for me to say. I'm not the head of the caucus anymore, but he's beloved. He is respected, and people want him to make that decision, not me.
He has said he has made the decision. He has said firmly this week he is going to run. Do you want him to run?
I want him to do whatever he decides to do, and that's the way it is. Whatever he decides, we go with.
And then she went on to say that we should give him some breathing room this week and wait for the NATO summit to be over before having more conversations in this regard. I'm listening to this and going, you're saying he should make the decision and you stand by his decision. He has made the decision. The decision is made. He made it when he decided to run for re-election, and then he's made it again repeatedly in the wake of these calls for him to step aside. He has said defiantly that only the Lord Almighty could force him from this race. So what do you think, what is she talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the conversation that we're seeing across the Democrats right now, whether it's on the Hill or the campaign. There's this private conversation, which is, I don't think Joe Biden should be running anymore. It doesn't look like he's strong enough to run. But publicly, there's this doubling down on Joe Biden's our guy. We're seeing it from progressives. You know, it's...
So here's... Maybe how I'm supposed to read this is she's saying, yeah, he gets to make that decision. Okay, again, the decision is made. Is she saying in a kind of, like, I'm thinking of, like, The Sopranos, which is one of my favorite television shows, when Tony tells one of his top guys, Ralph, that Ralph gets to make the decision about whether they whack this kid who screwed up. And Ralph's like, you know, I really want to do whatever you want to do here, Tony. And Tony's like, no, I said you get to make
your
the
decision.
Even though Tony clearly wants him, absolutely thinks he needs to whack the guy. But he won't say that. He's saying, nope, I stand by your decision. Is that what we're getting at? Like, what she really wants is him to step aside.
Yeah.
And so instead of saying, I think that, she's saying he should make the decision. And then, like, in between the lines, and the decision is he should step aside.
Yeah, well, I think what we're really seeing is a lack of political courage among Democrats. Look, I love Joe Biden. I think he's a good man. I think he's done a good job as a first term. But we all saw that debate, and the debate wasn't an isolated incident. I mean, there has been a lead up for months of what we saw at the debate prior. And so I think what you're seeing when Pelosi kind of equivocates and says that maybe he should go, but it's up to him. We all know what needs to happen. Like Joe Biden, it's gonna be tough.
But we know what needs to happen, but it's not. I think it's going to happen.
It's very Trumpian. I mean, if you think about the Access Hollywood tape and how there were multiple Republicans calling for him to step aside, and he just refused to do
nothing.
it.
They could do nothing.
They could do nothing. And
shoes on the other foot now.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the party kind of hostage.
Yeah. All right. The Democratic caucus is clearly torn over President Biden. Despite a growing rebel faction urging Biden to exit the race, the president not budging whatsoever or really doing anything. Is he, in fact, holding the caucus hostage? Former White House press secretary for Trump and Fox News host Kayleigh McEnany spoke with Axios reporter Alex Thompson about just that. Let's listen.
Privately, some Democrats have told me, they sort of feel like the president is holding them hostage by essentially being defiant and staying in. There's also concern by some Democrats about his inner circle and feeling that he is surrounded by too many people telling him what he wants to hear.
The closed-door meeting on Tuesday, Democrats chose to do nothing for now. That despite earlier in the week when senators, including Chris Murphy, Patty Murray, and Michael Bennet, warned Biden has to do at least more to show strength against Donald Trump if he is to continue in the race. There are still loyalists, however. New York Senator Chuck Schumer is standing by his man for now. He told reporters repeatedly, I'm with Joe.
Over in the House, Democrats had a come to Jesus moment on Biden's fate. Despite earlier cries that Joe had to go, that effort appears to be crumbling. According to a report in Axios, instead of a resolution, there were tears in the meeting. Some lawmakers described the meeting as tense, and others said that, quote, there were actual tears from people and not for Biden.
Tears. These are the tears of unfathomable sadness. Delicious, delicious tears.
I mean,
to take a South Park phrase.
Yeah, right, a little Eric Cartman.
Yeah.
When you look at the polling, you really have to wonder when Democrats are going to make that move. I mean, polling came out yesterday.
The move from crying to active tantrum to throwing things?
To some, I mean, look, at a certain point.
They can't do anything.
At a certain point, I mean, you've already started to see the leaks. There have been reports about Hunter attending meetings. There's been kind of knives out. It's only going to get more aggressive as the polling kind of data shows that the gap's widening. You're starting to hear it from, frontline members. That's really where the weight's going to come out. There's a poll that came out. It showed in Wisconsin, Biden's underperforming by 12 points. If we can't win Wisconsin, there is no path to re-election.
That's what it looks like, but there's no path to re-election for Biden if he's not running for re-election. So he's going to do it. The Democrats turning on him. So it's been interesting to watch. So far, he's having more trouble with what we would describe, I believe, as sort of more centrist and moderate Democrats. Perhaps that's because they tend to be in districts that are swingier, that are more vulnerable to Republican challengers. So they have been more hostile toward Biden in this moment. The progressives, the squad, we talked about AOC yesterday. They have surprised me in how supportive of Biden they are at this moment, because they've never been very supportive of Biden. In fact, they seem to, their stated deal is opposition to his policies, his broken promises to them on student loans, and the Israel policy has so inflamed them. These are not policies that I agree with them on, but it's what's important to them, and Biden has not been with them on them. But there's been AOC didn't call for him to get out. No,
AOC doubled down, said that she's for the president. Congresswoman Omar said she's for the president. The Washington Post had an interesting article today that talked about kind of behind the scenes in the squad. And the squad's rationale for doubling down on Biden appears to be that they believe in the next term, should he have a re-election, that his agenda would really be focused on kind of the things that they want.
I don't believe they believe that. I don't believe that. So how could they believe that? I wonder if it's like a deep dislike of Kamala Harris, or a sense that she is even more of a traitor to progressive causes than Joe Biden. I wonder if that's it. I don't know.
It's interesting because they put her in a really awkward position, because on one hand, she would be the presumptive nominee should he step aside.
Of course.
But on the other hand, every day when they give comments saying that there's no one else that can beat Trump, that there's no one else better positioned for this, it's a knock on her, and it knocks her chances should he step aside, or down the line should something happen and he be incapacitated.
All right, we'll have much more of that to discuss on Rising Today. Stay tuned.
Once upon a time, there was a president whose name was Donald Trump. He would seemingly do whatever he wanted, and the GOP would quietly fall in line, and if they didn't, they'd have to face Trump's public wrath. Well, now we have a President Biden who may be following the exact same tactics. Biden has insisted that he's staying in the race. He's called for Democratic defectors who are elites and publicly urging them to stop their speculation. But is it working? Joining us now to discuss all this is Hill's senior correspondent, Amie Parnes. Amie, thanks so much for joining us.
Forbes, happy to be here.
So at the state of the race right now, you're seeing Democrats kind of sending mixed messaging. On one half, you're seeing them say, Biden's fine, he should go ahead and run. And privately, you're hearing the opposite. What's your stance?
So I've been talking to a million people these days, as you might imagine. I'm working the phones constantly, and the sense I get from most Democrats is they are some of them are resigned to the fact that Biden is in this and they need to get behind him. But some of them, no one seems happy about it, is the bottom line. I talked to one big Democratic bundler yesterday who was basically making that case and saying, this is it is what it is right now. Like, we were not going to be able to get him out unless someone like President Obama comes forward, or Nancy Pelosi, as we saw this morning, or Jim Clyburn. And so they're almost, resigned to the fact. They're waiting for the other shoe to drop. There's a sense of everything being in limbo right now, and that's kind of not where you want to be heading into the Republican convention, when you should be fighting the opposition during that week.
I think there was a clear energy effort underway to replace Biden a few days ago, but hasn't he cleared that up by defiantly saying he will not exit the race? And at some point, I'm wondering if you're hearing from members of Congress, Democrats, who are they fearful of crossing a president who is utterly, steadfastly committed to staying in this job?
I mean, that's the thing. I think he's had a better week, but I think a lot of people are saying, where was this guy last week? We should have seen a lot more of this energy and this effort. He should have been calling into shows. He should have been writing the letter then, to members of Congress. And that's fair. I mean, a lot of people think that what happened on the heels of the debate is almost worse than the debate. And so I think you're hearing a lot of this going in. And the fact is that it still remains to be seen. I think, like I said, a lot of people are just waiting to see what happens now. But there isn't like a sense of, unity going into this. They know their convention is, 5-6 weeks away, and there is no resolution. And that's sort of not where you want to be as a party. And I think that continues going in the next month. And so I think they're happy to see a stronger, more resilient Biden, a defiant Biden, but they're also almost waiting to see what happens next. I think tomorrow's press conference will be another moment, all eyes on Biden, to watch. And I think they're waiting for those moments to see if he can kind of clear these hurdles.
Hakeem Jeffries was expecting to be the next Speaker of the House. Now, when you look at poll data, it looks like Democrats could lose, potentially 20 plus seats. What did Democrats plan to do in terms of messaging moving forward?
What people are trying to figure out right now. I think there is this consternation going forward. I think they're looking at the Cook report and seeing that there is trouble in a lot of these districts, a lot of these states. Now, a lot of solid blue states are leaning Democratic states. This is worrisome to a lot of people. And on the heels of the debate, I kept hearing two things. It was polling, and it was, what would happen to these down ballots, to these down ballot races, and whether people like Hakeem Jeffries would weigh in and want to change course. And so I think a lot of that is sort of still kind of in consideration. I think that's why you're seeing people like Pelosi today come forward, because clearly she's looking at what other people are looking at and kind of drawing conclusions that maybe this isn't the right decision going forward, even though the president is very defiant, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that clip earlier in the show. Pelosi asked, should he be the candidate? And she says, well, he needs to make that decision. To repeat myself, he has made that decision. It's been made. He's reiterated it. He's given no indication that any other decision is even conceivable or possible. So what are we to make of a kind of non-answer, her anticipating some future decision-making happening? Is there actually additional decision-making going on? Do we have any reason to think, any evidence that behind closed doors, Joe Biden is meeting with anyone besides Jill Biden and Hunter Biden, giving any different indication that he might step aside? Not that I can tell.
I mean, that's the thing. And I think that, he referred to the Lord Almighty. And a lot of my sources joke that the Lord Almighty is a combination of Pelosi, Clyburn, Obama, and Jeffries, maybe Schumer. But I think that a lot of people think that Schumer isn't persuasive enough in this moment. So I think, I think that this conversation behind the scenes is obviously going to keep going. You're seeing the president act defiant, do what he needs to do to try to rally the troops. But I think, as as the weeks go by, as the days go by, I think a lot of Democrats want to course correct right now. They think that this is the time to kind of seize the opportunity, that he has another few days to kind of rectify the situation. And if he doesn't, that's when you're going to see more calls. You'll see Pelosi take a stance. She's very smart and calculating in these moments. She knows exactly what she's saying. So this was a really big deal for her to come out and say what she said today, and kind of an indicator that more is to come, I think, behind the scenes, and that, people like Clyburn are kind of holding their cards close to the vest, but there remains to be a lot to be seen. I've spoken to people that are close to Obama. Obama put out this very public statement, obviously supporting his vice president, but he also is not happy about where this is going. And so I think you're going to continue to see these discussions happen, much to, I don't think President Biden will be happy about this. I think he's trying to shut it down, but I don't think he can effectively shut it down altogether.
What do you make of the fact that the Democratic Congress people who have come out so far, the Adam Smiths, the Joe Manchins, have been moderates who have really called for Biden to step down? It's been the progressives who have really kind of been that firewall in terms of holding the wall and making sure that Biden doesn't have to step down so far.
And that's been one of the most surprising elements, I think, of this whole thing, that the president is getting support from progressives. But people like Seth Moulton, someone who he considers Biden a mentor. Biden campaigned for him on the campaign trail. These are people that are very close to him, who are coming out and saying that he should withdraw. And that's got to hurt in some ways. I know there aren't too many of them right now, but these are very much Biden's people. And so I think that if more of them come out, if more moderates come out, that makes almost a bigger statement about the path going forward. And I'm not convinced that this is over. I know that a lot of people, we've written that the tide has turned. And I think it's a minute by minute, hour by hour kind of story at this point. I think that a lot could change very quickly. Even though the president is obviously defiant and wants to stay in this race, I think that he could start having conversations with people like Michael Bennett, who made a very rational case last night on CNN. If he has that conversation with him in person, I wonder if that starts to change his mind a little bit.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
More bad news for President Biden. 47% of Democrats now say he should step aside as the nominee, according to the latest polling from YouGov. 13% were unsure, and 39% said that he should not step aside. His results were worse for Democrats under the age of 45, a clear majority of whom want a different candidate.
Even so, members of the Congressional Black Caucus are rallying behind the president at a time where he needs it the most. After several congressional Democrats called for President Biden to drop out, Biden held a virtual meeting with the Congressional Black Caucus, one of the most influential groups in the House Democratic Caucus. Biden reportedly told caucus members at the meeting, quote, "You've had my back, and I'll continue to have yours." And following the meeting, several members reiterated their support. Not one spoke up against the president. Take a listen to Democratic Representative Maxine Waters.
But I do want to tell you how strongly I feel about support for Biden, how I believe that this Democratic Party will eventually come together. We don't have that many members who are talking about he should step down. Don't forget, there are 213 Democrats, and you talk about 9 members, and I don't think we have a long way to go. We're not really divided. And so I am hopeful. And I do believe that we're going to be fine. And I do believe that Biden is competent and capable of being and continue to be the president of the United States of America.
Similarly, Democratic Representative Frederica Wilson said, quote, "Any leader calling for President Biden to drop out needs to get their priorities straight and stop undermining this incredible actual leader who has delivered real results for our country." Freshman Democrat Gabe Amo said he will be in Biden's corner precisely because of his track record of fighting for hardworking Americans. And one of Biden's most prominent black allies in Congress, James Clyburn, also repeatedly expressed his support. Let's watch.
Was there conversation about Vice President Kamala Harris in there?
We are riding with Biden.
You're still not.
Clyburn said previously he's behind Biden, but is open to embracing Vice President Harris should Biden step aside. And for context, here black voters helped send Biden to the White House in 2020. Then he won 92% of the black vote, but polls have since shown Biden consistently losing ground to Trump among black voters. A New York Times Siena poll shows Biden currently winning 73% of the black vote, compared to Trump with 15%.
Well, they're riding with Biden. That's what Clyburn said, and he has always been able to draw on his base of African American support. It's his most dependable base of support, like I just said, and he needs them now, and they are signaling that they're standing with him.
Yeah, it's interesting because there would be no Biden presidency without the CBC and black support. In South Carolina, they rebirthed that campaign and really led to his victory. But given what's at stake, when we start to talk about the rolling back of the Civil Rights Act and things like that, it puts CBC members in a precarious position because they're backing Biden full-throatedly. But when you look at the poll numbers, it looks like he would lose that race. Right. And should he lose, the rollback and effect on the African-American community would be devastating.
I mean, it is kind of interesting that his most likely successor replacement would be Kamala Harris, a black woman. And I totally get it that just because you, surface level skin deep have that characteristic does not mean you are well liked.
Yeah, Tim Scott isn't getting supported by the CBC.
Sure, I get that, but it's still, nevertheless, it's interesting that this is the most loyal group of people to Biden.
To a white guy. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah,
the CBC
when
is
the replacement would be a black woman who seems like she would at least have a somewhat slightly better, might not be, I don't think it's a massively better chance of defeating Donald Trump. I think it's a better chance than Joe Biden at this point.
Absolutely. And when you look at the optics, I mean, you have someone who is younger, who would, I think, excite at least a younger base. She's African American, so you start to lift those numbers up. Look, if Trump is at 15%, if he's at double digits come November, Democrats are not, he's just winning. Democrats are going to have a wipe out night. And so the effects of this race aren't just at the top of the ticket. We're looking at down ballot races, and that's really where I think you're going to see the worry.
Yeah, and his defenders keep saying that, this is a distraction because Trump is such a threat to black people, minorities, women, gay people, blah, 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 blah. But then the critics are saying, well, yeah, because of those things, we want a different candidate.
Yeah, it's also going to be interesting. I think this plays a unique role in gerrymandering. If you think about the people who are coming out against Biden staying in the race, it's people who are in safe districts. It's the moderates who are really in these districts that are swing districts who are coming out and speaking up. A lot of the CBC members, their districts have been gerrymandered, and so their seats are safe. And so there really isn't a lot of incentive politically for them to come out.
Right, even though many of those members are somewhat more moderate. It depends on the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Black people overall, as a voting bloc, are more liberal than the rest of the, are more likely to be Democratic than the rest of the nation.
But
within the Democratic Party, they're more moderate, they're less liberal, they're more conservative than white people within the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and I think Democrats often get that wrong. Anecdotally, I was talking to my Uber driver yesterday, and one of the things he was talking about, he is a recent immigrant to the United States, and he talked about how Democrats are really missing the mark when they talk about, just normal day-to-day things, that a lot of the PC police things have kind of driven him away. A lot of the anti-family,
the abolish the policers.
Yeah, he agrees with the broad.
You can't find a minority taxi driver anywhere who wants to abolish the police. You can't do it.
No,
I challenge you to.
No, and immigration is something, and as someone who is an immigrant, is something that he worries about. A lot of the worries aren't about the broad democratic principles, but it's kind of where the party's turning right now.
Yeah, it's an out of touch characteristic of Democrats that they've been trying to shake for a long time. And Biden was the one to do that with his more normie kind of approach, and his he harkened back. He's old. He doesn't seem to be uber culturally progressive or alienating, or someone who's going to use PC language in a way we find obnoxious.
Yeah.
Now his grasp of the English language is such that you're right, it's not capable of offending us, it's just also not capable of reassuring us.
And him not being able to be his best kind of marketer, be his best spokesman, I think is the biggest problem. Because now, every day that he's not on the campaign trail, every day that he's not giving speeches, people are going to really kind of reiterate that notion that he can't make the case for himself. Yeah. But when you put him in front of the camera, every opportunity is a huge risk for Democrats.
Well, as I pointed out with that poll at the beginning of the segment, the only group of Democrats who now think he should stay in the race is fellow elderly Democrats, or at least the 55 up category. As it gets older and older, they had some age categories. Older and older, they're comfortable with him being in that position, which is not actually a necessarily intuitive result to me, because it could have been perfectly plausible that actually fellow old people would say, yeah, I have no business being president, neither does Joe Biden, but that's not what the poll suggested.
Which, I was more anecdotal. I was talking to my parents, I was talking to my grandparents, or my grandmother rather, and at first she was really defensive of Biden. But when you kind of got to that second layer of questioning and you're talking about the age dynamic and would she feel comfortable being president at that age, she acknowledges none of her friends in their 80s are really at a point where they should be handling national crises on the day-to-day. But also, there is this natural defensiveness. But once you get past that, she even admitted that what she has seen so far doesn't make her comfortable heading into November. And so I think it gets back to that, what you're hearing privately is completely different from what you're seeing publicly.
My grandmother does not think Joe Biden has any business being president, but nor does any other Democrat in her mind.
No, but they all will say he's a good man, but just the time has passed.
Yeah. All right, we'll have more Rising right after this. Boeing planes are continuing to break down. Just yesterday, a Boeing 757-200 aircraft lost a wheel during takeoff. The plane did not make it to its destination and landed safely. The wheel was recovered in Los Angeles, according to United Airlines, and no injuries have been reported. Now, this comes as Boeing is in talks with the Defense Department about how its guilty plea deal in connection with 2 MAX 737 crashes could affect its government contracts. Per reporting in Reuters, Pentagon spokesperson told reporters that the agency would make an assessment to decide the impact of the guilty plea on Boeing's contracts. He was unclear on whether the Pentagon is in communication with the plane maker. According to its annual report, 37% of Boeing's revenue was from government contracts. In 2022, it had $14.8 billion worth in Pentagon contracts.
On Sunday, the Department of Justice said in court filings that Boeing agreed to plead guilty for misleading federal regulators in connection with 2 MAX 737 crashes, one in 2018 and the other 5 months later in 2019. 346 people were killed. The plea deal is not final yet, but if Boeing agrees to it, it will have to pay a $243.6 million fine and invest $455 million in safety and compliance. This is a get-out-of-jail-free card for Boeing, as it can now avoid a public trial that could take years. Families of the victims killed are not happy with the deal and want a trial. Lawyers for the families indicated they would request a federal judge to reject the deal. Final details of the legal deal are expected to be filed by July 19th. Remember, 2 of Boeing whistleblowers died suddenly. John Barnett died from a self-inflicted gun wound in March, and then Joshua Dean, who battled a severe infection and lost his life to it in May, passed.
Right, and those were both
questionable
odd circumstances, although, the forensics, the police investigation has been such that they were
one of those guys
fault.
One of those guys said, "Just remember, if
I'm found dead,
I didn't kill myself."
And
was
what we're
found
being
dead.
led to understand is that he did kill himself, but who knows?
Yeah.
It is certainly suspicious as all hell. It actually reminds me of that. We were talking about George Clooney just a minute ago. That George Clooney movie where they try to
cover up.
The company tries to kill him for knowing something about how harmful the products are.
Yeah, it's like
Michael Clayton.
Yeah, there we go, Michael Clayton.
Yeah, great movie.
It is a great movie. It's it's interesting.
What was Tilda Swinton doing? That's what I want to know.
Boeing's in a really bad position right now, because if they are forced to go to trial, which I think they should be, the information about what they knew, what the cutting of the corners for these planes and the production, it's going to go public. And for a publicly traded company that does defense contracting with the government, those stories could be just devastating for Boeing's stock and for the company itself.
Yeah, most people probably want the billions in taxpayer dollars that are given to private companies to
Bail them
arrange
out.
for services. And in addition to the bailing out, yes. I was talking about for the legitimate services they do on behalf of the government, but you're right, they also just get bailed out by the government.
The COVID bailout.
I was totally against it. I said, this is not going to benefit any normal working people. This is going to be just for the big guys at the company are going to take a vacation on your dime, and this is totally unnecessary. We should never do this kind of thing. Now, there needs to be accountability for planes being built improperly on the taxpayer's dime that we're paying for. And now it remains the case that so I have to overcome a little bit of my skepticism here that anything is all that wrong, because we don't have a lot of plane crashes in the United States. In fact, we've had 0 for like the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. Thank God for computers.
Yes, it remains the safest way to travel. We put up with so many car deaths, tens of thousands of car deaths every year. Nobody's holding congressional hearings for the car companies, right? It's just accepted as a part of life that so many people will die every year in these horrific car crashes. The number of people who've died because of plane malfeasance is like in the single digits over years and years period. So I don't want to like scare people away from flying, because
As someone who flies multiple times every week.
Right, same. I'm flying out. I'm going to Vegas tomorrow.
Oh, okay. All right.
For work and maybe a little bit of fun too, perhaps. If you discourage people from flying and they choose to drive instead, you're actually causing you're worsening a public crisis, because people are more likely to die in those circumstances. So I'm very cautious in my commentary here, because the last thing I want to do is encourage people to drive instead of flying. That said, Boeing clearly needs to be to make right, to assure us that everything is fine. Yeah, to engage in accountability. It's becoming, if it's Boeing, I ain't going. People are saying that.
Yeah, and I think the broader issue that people are really upset about is corporate pay. The CEO of Boeing got, I think, somewhere around $30-40 million in pay this year, while they're having tires fall off, while they're having emergency doors fall off.
The door blew off.
Yeah, the problems that they're having are, a monthly, if not weekly issue. Yes, there aren't multiple crashes, but there's potential crashes. And as you're seeing with these, the families of the people who died, they're covering up information. And so the idea that you could be CEO of a company like Boeing, who in the last couple of years has had multiple scandals, and still be pulling in tens of millions of dollars for what is undoubtedly a poorly run organization, that's really upsetting to people who are trying to figure out how to keep their lights on.
Yeah, it's absolutely outrageous. It's outrageous to everyone, I think, both sides of the political aisle. Someone presiding over numerous disasters should not have this just utterly unbelievable level of pay. The golden parachutes.
Yeah.
And these companies got bailed out.
Yeah.
They got bailed out. It's outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, we're having people pay back money that was given during COVID, individuals who can barely afford it, but we're having corporations who were given taxpayer money, are able to have their own private planes they're flying on, are able to do all these things and never have to worry about the implications that the everyday person does. And I think that's something that if Democrats really want to kind of change the messaging that's going on right now, this would be the perfect test case. Talking about the corporate pay structures at Boeing, or even, talking about X and, Elon and Tesla getting that huge payout, that's something that I think really bothers people. And as we get more into Boeing, as, potentially this trial goes public, and we start to see discovery, that's where I think you're going to see more corporations really worry, because undoubtedly there's emails, there's always correspondence where people are talking about the very thing that's going to now go up before the American public.
Stick around, we'll have more Rising right after this. More bad news about Joe Biden and his health. Neurologist Dr. Tom Pitts said it's a fact that President Joe Biden has Parkinsonisms and degeneration of the brain.
You've never examined President Biden, from my knowledge. You never even spoken yet to President Biden.
Been in the same room as
and we're just going to use what we have so far, which is what we've seen, the president's interviews, and the information coming out of the White House.
His motor symptoms are degenerating. He has Parkinsonisms. That is a fact. He has degeneration of the brain. Show me the MRI. Show me he doesn't. Put your money where your mouth is. He definitely has it. But the problem is, when you look at his situation, you can't say, oh, I know for a fact he has just this classic features of neurodegeneration. I mean, word finding difficulties, and that's not, oh, I couldn't find the word. That's from degeneration of the word retrieval area.
He's also overcome stuttering, though. Could that be part of that, too?
No, this is not a palatal issue or a speech discrepancy, which is very different from a lemma dysfunction, actual word retrieval.
Meanwhile, ABC News anchor George Stephanopoulos, who sat down with the president last week and questioned him on his mental fitness, was caught on camera on the streets of New York yesterday and asked if he thinks Biden can serve another 4 years.
Hey, excuse me. Hey, how you doing? Good. What do you think? Do you think Biden should step down? You talked to him more than anybody else have lately, and you could be honest. You don't think he can serve 4 more years? All right. That's an answer.
Stephanopoulos responded to the incident last night. He said in a statement earlier today, "I responded to a passerby. I shouldn't have." ABC News also weighed in, quote, "George expressed his own point of view and not the position of ABC News."
And what he expressed, in case you couldn't hear it there, was that Biden could not serve 4 more years. That was a damaging series of interviews. Additionally, just saw George Clooney put out an op-ed in the New York Times calling on Biden to step aside.
I guess these are those elites that Biden was talking about.
Yeah, right. I don't particularly care about George Clooney's opinion. It does tell you something that George Stephanopoulos, who did just interview him at great length, said that he was not at all reassured by the interview that he conducted. And
Clooney just did the fundraiser in LA with Biden. So both met him recently, had like first-person interactions with him, and both saying he's not up for running. I know the White House really wants to hammer this whole like punditry is taking over the narrative and it's not any factual basis. But the people who are meeting with him, the Adam Smiths, the George Clooneys, like these people who intimately are having interactions with him are saying he is not the person he is.
In addition to a neurologist, that wasn't some crazy right-wing doctor on some contrarian news site. That was NBC.
And I will say that guy admitted he had never met with the president, hadn't seen his records.
Well, that's never stopped us before.
Yeah, but I will say that doctor is making some interesting points. I mean, we all see what we see, and I think this is why it's so important that the White House and the campaign have been the fact that they've been gaslighting people for so long. There's a trust deficit.
Why are there not more calls to convene the cabinet? I mean, there were for Trump over his mainstream media did run at various points with a narrative that Trump was psychotic and deranged and mentally unfit to serve as president and racist and Hitler and a million other things. And why shouldn't the cabinet act to remove him due to mental unfitness? They went with that a couple times. It seems Biden's decline seems, again, you can dislike Trump for policy reasons. Biden's decline seems much more evident and well established from a medical perspective, and nobody's doing anything about it right now.
No, and there actually was a system in place that was supposed to protect against this. During the Trump presidency, Pelosi put forth legislation that was supposed to convene an independent medical person that could check to make sure that the president at all times had their faculties. After Trump lost the election, they actually didn't put the legislation back up to be voted on. Had that legislation been put up, there would be an independent panel that could go and check to see whether the president was still fit.
Amazing.
It's interesting, right?
Great little fact. Thank you for sharing that with us. So look, the long and short of it is, I still don't think any of this is going to persuade Joe Biden to step aside. Maybe the loss of George Clooney's support could be devastating to him personally, but we're hearing that. Oh, by the way, we should discuss this. It's already been discussed. Jill Biden, Hunter Biden he's surrounded by them. They're gatekeeping for the president. They're urging him to stay in the race. Wasn't it supposed to be that one of the clear contrasts between Trump and Biden, supposedly, was that Biden would not involve his family members in the business of running the country. I appreciate that this isn't quite the same thing as literally putting Jared Kushner in charge of wide swaths of public policy, but whether Biden is fit to serve is a public policy issue. He hasn't put Hunter Biden in charge of some aspect of the government, but whether the commander-in-chief continues to serve and is fit to serve, that is a decision being motivated by Hunter Biden's involvement. That seems to me to be coming pretty close to breaking a fundamental promise that Biden had made, and makes the contrast between Biden and Trump on this issue much more slight.
Yeah, I got to say, I was not just like stunned, but really turned off by the fact that Hunter Biden was in those meetings after the Supreme Court ruling and as Joe Biden was preparing to make that statement. Look, I'm a Biden supporter, I'm a Democrat, all that kind of good stuff. But the closer we're getting to this election, the more we're starting to see him turn into this almost Trumpian foot in the stand, kind of not being flexible at all. It's a
Hunter Biden was
turnoff.
just convicted of a crime.
Yes.
He was convicted of a crime.
I mean, if for nothing else, Democrats would lose their mind if
Yes.
Jared Kushner had been convicted of a crime and then was in the Oval Office days later. It's not a good look. It shows that this insider mentality is really kind of taking over the White House. They're not listening to anyone. They're making stupid errors, things that are preventable. This just isn't the campaign that we saw in 2020. And it's starting to look more and more like this Trumpian thing that I think most Democrats are really comfortable with.
Yeah, we've got plenty of time to go still. I guess the question now is, could it be that when the NATO summit is done, will there be another sustained push to kind of get him to step aside? I think there was one sort of over the weekend as a result of the Stephanopoulos interview, and I think that kind of fizzled out when he said, absolutely not, I will not step aside. And you're seeing some people back off their calls for him to do that. I'm wondering if after this week of policy happening in D.C., this which has been incredibly disruptive to those of us trying to...
Yeah, I was going to say, traffic has been a nightmare.
Traffic has been insane.
I do think there's an argument to be made that, you take a little bit of a pullback while we're having the NATO conference here. You've got world leaders here. There's major policy being discussed around Ukraine, and you don't want to undermine a sitting president during that process. So I do think you're going to see more calls after that conference ends. But he also has to do a press conference today where he's going to be fielding questions. What's that going to look like? Because this press conference is going to be the first of what will be 117 odd days of him being analyzed. Every word he says, every movement he makes being analyzed solely under the lens of, can he effectively be able to be president? Can he just do the bare minimum of the job? And so Democrats are making a very big risk, taking a very big gamble by saying that no matter what, they're behind Biden. Should he stumble today? Should next week something happen? I mean, the whole case for Democrats is that we want to be talking about what a danger Trump will be, what a danger Project 2025 will be. This week has been spent talking about Biden and his health and not about what a threat Trump will be.
Clooney writes, this is about age, nothing more, but also nothing that can be reversed. We are not going to win in November with this president. On top of that, we won't win the House, and we're going to lose the Senate. This isn't only my opinion. This is the opinion of every senator and Congress member and governor that I've spoken with in private, every single one, irrespective of what they're saying publicly. Yep. We love to talk about how the Republican Party has ceded all power to a single person who seeks to hold on to the presidency, and yet most of our members of Congress are opting to wait and see if the dam breaks. If the dam has broken, we can put our heads in the sand and pray for a miracle in November, or we can speak the truth. And he says it's disingenuous at best to argue that Democrats already settled on the nominee. This is new information.
This is big for Democratic donors. Jeffrey Katzenberg, who we all know is a big kind of Hollywood producer, he's a huge Democratic donor and bundles a lot of money, as does George Clooney. And by Clooney coming out and putting out this op-ed, that's going to put a signal to a lot of donors and a lot of these mega bundlers that they should start looking elsewhere. I know we talk about kind of the Hollywood elite and actors and things like that, but Clooney isn't just an actor, but he's also, his wife is working on the Hague, working in the Hague, and working on the Israel and Gaza prosecution. Like there's a lot of ties to this.
That's a good point. All right, we'll be back with more Rising right after this.
Donald Trump is threatening Meta's Mark Zuckerberg with jail time. The former president took to Truth Social to urge Republicans to pass the SAVE Act, a bill that would mandate proof of citizenship when registering to vote. Trump then said, quote, "Our whole voting system is under siege. All I can say is that if I'm elected president, we will pursue election fraudsters at levels never seen before, and they will be sent to prison for long periods of time. We already know who you are. Don't do it, Zuckerbucks. Be careful." For context, the feud between Trump and Zuckerberg dates back to Trump's presidency. Trump was ultimately banned on the platform following the January 6th attack. The ban was lifted in January of 2023. Still, Trump's comments against Meta have increasingly gotten harsher. He referred to the social media company as, quote, the enemy of the people back in March. And in February, Trump called for Zuckerberg to be prosecuted.
In other Meta news, the company has updated its hate speech policies toward posts attacking Zionists on both Facebook and Instagram. Meta said, quote, going forward, we will remove content attacking Zionists when it is not explicitly about the political movement, but instead uses anti-Semitic stereotypes or threatens other types of harm through intimidation or violence directed against Jews or Israelis under the guise of attacking Zionists. So Trump hates Mark Zuckerberg.
Hates him.
And actually, these Zuckerbucks thing isn't even about him being banned from Facebook. It's about a grant that Mark Zuckerberg and his wife made to election-related nonprofits that Trump and his MAGA people have said has something to do with Trump losing the election, or
during COVID there was the
getting
effort.
out the vote for people who are not going to vote for Trump.
Yeah, I think the more that Trump tweets, or Truth Social, whatever you want to call it, this is good for Biden. This is good for Democrats. Like, this is the distraction that they need. He's been really disciplined over the last week or so and not, done a lot of or at least not gotten the focus of the press in terms of attacking people. The more he puts the onus back on, retribution and back on the enemy of the people, kind of that language, that rhetoric, the more he reminds voters about what his first term looked like. And I think that's really something that his team is going to want to quiet down.
So look, I don't think going after Mark Zuckerberg is very productive. No. I actually really hate the blame everything that goes wrong is Facebook's fault kind of approach to governance that both of our parties have taken, because it does go both ways. Donald Trump is far from the first political figure to rail against Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. Joe Biden accused Mark Zuckerberg of killing people by not taking enough contrarian COVID information off the platform. And after Trump won the election in 2016, we had to endure like 3 years from every major mainstream progressive media person saying Donald Trump won the election because Mark Zuckerberg, because of what he did on Facebook, that he was compromised by Russia, that all the Russiagate stuff, the bots and everything on Facebook, all of those claims ended up being wildly exaggerated by a media class that didn't understand the platform very well. I think it was all very silly. I think this similarly is silly for Trump to blame his 2020 loss on Mark Zuckerberg. But again, both sides do this. Everything that has gone wrong in those two elections was attributed to Mark Zuckerberg. I end up feeling like I have no special for the guy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like you got a little defensive for Zuckerberg.
Well, it's just ridiculous. When somebody is being attacked, and I watched him being, when he was dragged into those hearings, and that Jack Dorsey was in those too, and the head of Google and other tech CEOs, and then they just get screamed at incoherently by elderly members of our government
with
who
no
don't
idea
understand technology at all. Like, what's his face? Another very old Democrat. There's so many. One starts to forget who's who. Had a printed out on a piece of cardboard, screenshots from a hateful or a fake
performance
Russian Facebook group, being like, "Why didn't you take this down, Mark?" He's like, "What?"
Watching the staffers behind the members of Congress trying to explain to them what they're talking about or calling it the Facebook. I think that's where you really start to show how out of touch politicians are.
Exactly.
In technology, especially social media, has been kind of the scapegoat, but also the boon for both parties. Democrats loved social media during the Obama campaign because it's really kind of one of the avenues they used to lift up his candidacy. But under Donald Trump, it became easy to justify the argument that Russia in collusion was being used through social media to amplify Trump. It's what Republicans, Democrats love and hate all at the same time, depending on who it's benefiting.
So what is the argument for not passing the SAVE Act, which Democrats oppose? The SAVE Act is to, at the federal level, require proof of citizenship to vote. I accept and agree that illegal immigrants are not voting in some large numbers, and it is not. It's kind of a
because it's already
conservative, made-up thing, but. What if we double and triple check that people who are voting are citizens? Is something so wrong with that?
So there's nothing wrong with the fact that we're checking, but it's something we're already doing. So now we want to allocate more funds to do something we're already doing. The idea that undocumented immigrants are illegally voting is false, and that narrative is just being used to kind of drum up more fear around immigration and things like that. But there is an argument, which I think is logical, that people who are living, let's use DC for an example. If you're living in DC, and yes, you may be undocumented, but you need to be able to have a voice in how funds are allocated in the city you live in, whether or not you're here legally or not. It's why in the census, we count people who are undocumented because they still use the funds, they still use the resources of that city. So I actually don't have a problem with undocumented people voting in state and municipality elections, but they're not voting in federal elections. They don't have the ability to, and it would be a crime for them to do so and open them up to even more issues. And so I think it's just, this is kind of where Democrats kind of find themselves in trouble in the messaging wars, because they lose the messaging war of undocumented people shouldn't be voting in elections because of this kind of stuff.
Yeah. I would also go after Republicans a little bit here. While it's just a terrible idea and a non-starter to allow illegal immigrants to be voting in any context, it is true at the local level. Yeah. You want more, again, I make this argument to Republicans all the time. You want people who are concerned about the community and crime and want more resources put not toward woke nonsense, but toward like actually making the city more livable. You would want the immigrants voting. It's progressive white people who vote for wokeness and DEI and liberal excess and want to defund the police. It's not the immigrants.
I say all the time, if you want to know who's more danger to, immigrant and minority communities, it's just Jim Jordan may be a threat, but it's also the suburban white family who loves black people until they move into their neighborhood or go to their private school. Yeah. They're just as dangerous. And so I always think about Puerto Rico. Republicans for a long time have been pushing back against Puerto Rico becoming a state. But when you actually look at the polling, Puerto Rico would be a Republican state if it was added.
It's like we talked about earlier. The cab driver, the immigrant cab driver, doesn't want more illegal immigration.
No.
And is worried about crime.
They are.
Like the rest
and
of us.
Tired of feeling like they have to think about every word they say, everything that they say, and that they're going to offend someone.
All right, that does it for us today on Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is only Wednesday, right? I've lost track of the week. So there will be another installment of our show tomorrow. Please tune in then. And in the meantime, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. And I believe you, sir, will be back with us again tomorrow.
Can't
Great.
wait.
Tune in.